Hi, I'm Ariana, and this is the Earth Rising podcast. And I'm really excited tonight because we are recording on a pretty cool day of astrology. And we're also dropping in with Samantha from Hands of Mercury, who is an astrologer extraordinaire who I met in January when I reached out to her for a 2025 reading. And it was totally changed my life. I go back and I reference that reading every single month. And so she's here tonight to join us to talk about some astrological intersections between the work of Terras Gamos and Pluto. So before we jump into all of that, Samantha, do you want to take a second and just introduce yourself? I'd love to know, yeah, anything you want to share about yourself as an astrologer, like what kind of astrology you practice. I know you also work closely with the Mayan calendar and the tarot, and I think many other things. So whatever you want to say about yourself, we'd love to hear it.
Thank you so much, Ariana. It is a pleasure. I'm so excited to be here. And thank you for coming and trusting me as your astrologer. It's been a pleasure to see your work develop and unfold and knowing kind of the behind the scenes of Terras Gamos as it was in the gestation period before coming to the world to be birthed. So, for myself, I am an astrologer, I am a ceremonialist, and I am also a diviner. I have been studying the tarot since around the time I was 15, 16 years old, and then started studying astrology around 2014 now. So, it's been a love and a passion of mine for a long time, and started off in the usual pop psychology, astrology, sun sign ways, made my way to traditional and Hellenistic astrology as well. And that is mainly what I practice and working with the whole sign system. And then, yes, I ended up going to Guatemala in 2021 for my first time and finding teachers of the Mayan tradition of the Cholqui or Solquin count of time, the calendar, and working with the Nawales or the stars, the essences that make up our earthly experience, our dimension here. So there's a few different ways that I love to look at the ways that we can track, observe, and honor time that is outside of this Gregorian system that we are so accustomed to in this modern way of counting time that in a lot of ways is actually rather unhealthy and out of sync with the natural cycles of nature, of earth, and of the cosmos above us that our ancestors watched so diligently and with consistency night by night.
Wow, I love that. It's actually I didn't know all of that in terms of your background. It's really cool to hear and it makes me excited because so much of what we're going to be talking about today is like the bigger time cycle. We're talking about evolution of the planet. We're talking about evolution of the entire human collective. So I love your perspective that you have on time already just from yeah, your expertise in your studies in Guatemala. So why don't we start just there with what are we working with today? Because we had decided that we were going to record our episode on today's astrology. So I'd love to hear you just talk a little bit about that.
Absolutely. So, the astrology of today has us in Virgo season, and Virgo season is the sign of the maiden. It's actually connected to Persephone and Demeter. So, Demeter being the goddess of agriculture and the grain. There is connections to Hestia, the goddess of the hearth. So, it's actually very fitting because we are going to be talking about the myth of the abduction of Persephone and how that connects with Pluto and Hades. As well, today we have a Taurus moon, and that was a main draw for this moment as the moon finds herself in exaltation in a sign where she feels celebrated and nourished on this day. But as well, we find ourselves in eclipse season. So, this 2 week window between September 7th and September 21st this year, we have eclipses. And this is a fated time where there can be a lot of upheaval. It's been known to be times where there are major beginnings and endings in personal lives, in the collective, as well as shifts and dynamics in power. So, we actually can look to leadership, to government. There's usually some pretty big sweeping things that can happen at this time. So it's an intense and dynamic time, but today has a really beautiful earthy tone to it. I will add as well, in the Mayan Cholki count of time, we are working under the Trisena of Tihash. This is a 13-day period where we're guided by the Noel Tihash, which is the obsidian blade. So for those on the video, this is an obsidian blade. It is a blade that is a mirror. So this is where we can be in a time of our shadows coming to light and having some of our darkness and our light reflected back to us through other people, through experiences. And this is the blade that harms and it's the blade that heals. It's the blade that is a weapon and can create damage and destruction when placed in certain hands, and it is also the blade of the surgeon, and it's the scalpel. It's the blade that is the healer, the curandera, that can take away infection, can cut off what is rotting, and that would spoil the whole body. That would damage and take away the whole ecosystem. So it's a double-sided sword, if you will. And under this Trisena of Tihash, today is 10 Keh or Lahu Keh. And this is the day of the deer. And the deer is the guardian of the four directions, the four elements. Also, we find the deer in the forest. It's a protector of the sacred masculine. So, again, coming to this very earthy, grounded day, perfect for Terras Gamos podcast.
Oh my gosh, that is just too good. I'm just like grinning over here because that's like a perfect segue because, we're going to be talking about like the Plutonian intersection with the work of Terras Gamos. But what that really means is, these big themes of evolution and transformation, as we've mentioned. And actually, when you and I were chatting, when we were planning this episode, we were talking about how in this great evolutionary arc that's happening, Terras Gamos is really about the work into Earth partnership. There's a reckoning with the pain of separation from the Earth that has to happen before we can reconnect with her. And so there's this shadow work that needs to happen. It's an individual process. It's also a collective process. And I'm talking about the shadow work of the entire human family from a historical standpoint of all of these centuries that we've actually lived through the myth of separation from the earth. And we've talked about how there's a lot of this like new earth terminology being used right now. And we're thinking about evolution and transcendence and like we're moving into like the new earth and the fifth dimension. And we hear a lot of that in the spiritual and consciousness discussions today. But you and I think we're really finding a moment of alignment where we were like, we have to do this shadow work. We have to integrate where we've come from. We have to integrate the story of separation that we've been living in before we can come into the rebirth and the ascension and the integration. So what you said about obsidian and what you said about like these time cycles and like the earth energy that we're in right now and the eclipses, death and rebirth, it just all feels like it's so aligned with this idea of it's not so much a new earth as it is this evolved earth or an integrated earth.
Absolutely. It is a time of both and. And I think that the divisiveness that we see at this moment in particular, and it really does feel like it's been kind of dredged up again, if you could say, if we're in this Pisces Virgo eclipse, we have kind of picked up the sand and we've picked up what was on the seafloor to rise up again and say, look at this, look at the space of what the harm has been of going, you're either this or you're either that, and the sides and the divisiveness. And while duality is a very important part of the earthly experience, it is the integration of the duality. It is the harmonizing of the duality and being able to honor the many prisms and facets and ways in which lessons, experiences, deaths and rebirths and evolution wants to take place, and trying in our own ways to not judge things that are, again, very complex in nature, but also having a sense of fierceness when it comes to that kind of core understanding of what is right and then what is the hard way. And I think that's a better way of it. It might not be right or wrong, but hey, what's been the challenging way? And are we going on a path that's just making this harder and longer and more difficult for ourselves? And how do we get back on a path that is for humanity's highest potential?
Yeah, right, exactly. And when you talk about this both and like really acknowledging and affirming all of the facets of what it means to be human, it makes me think about this maturation process that the human family is undertaking right now, where we're being called in. And it's like the question that I feel like we're being posed to by Gaia is, are you going to continue being separated from me? And essentially that means separated from each other and separated from yourselves. Or are you going to mature and join me in this place of harmony and union that I'm going towards? And so it makes me think about all of these facets of self. And as part of the maturation process, there needs to be this recognition of where we've come from, where we've been, which has been very much in like a shadow place. We've been very much playing out stories of pain, playing out stories of trauma, playing out stories of separation and division. That's been largely the human story in the last couple hundred of years. And now, so there's like the recognition of where we've come from. And then there's the checkpoint of where we are now today, where we're in this like juncture, this choice moment where it's like, are we going to continue in that shadow place, or are we going to try to start to integrate it and like look at our options and see maybe are there parts of what it meant to be human that we were never embodying before or lost a long time ago, and it's time to remember that we're not creatures of separation, we're actually creatures of union. And then where are we going to go? Are we going to, or how are we going to evolve? How are we going to mature? Are we going to meet Gaia in her moment? Are we going to support her? Because she doesn't actually really need us to complete her journey, but I think she would benefit from us joining her in a sense. And so there's this idea of like, can we as a human family heal ourselves in order to join her on her process? So I'm wondering with all of that, if you can speak a little bit to like the aspects of Pluto and how Pluto is a really supportive planet or a really resonant planet for this journey of maturation and the both and all of the aspects of what it means to be human. Could you speak to a little bit of that?
Absolutely. Pluto is fearsome. Pluto is secretive. Pluto is something that we can look at and also a mystery that we will never fully know. And that is scary and it's exciting and it's magnetic. People who have that dominant Pluto in their birth chart, maybe they are dominant in Scorpio, will usually exude some of this as well. But Pluto as an archetype, we go back to Greek mythology and we go to Hades, both as an archetype, both as a god, and as a place, a dwelling of the underworld. In a place where the souls were kept. So we have the reign of Zeus, and Zeus is the father of the sky and ruler of the sky. Then we have Poseidon, who is ruling the ocean and the seas. And we have Hades, ruler of the underworld. So Pluto doesn't have as many myths as some of the other major Greek gods and goddesses in the pantheon, but there is one that we definitely are going to speak on that is really relevant and potent in what Pluto and the underworld means, and that is with the abduction of Persephone from her mother Demeter into the underworld. Now, Pluto is an evolutionary force, and if we actually look to the school of evolutionary astrology, which I can speak on, I'm not well versed and well studied as other certified evolutionary astrologers, but Pluto, in a sense, on a basic level in that school of thought, is a point in our chart and in the collective where it is what is part of our evolutionary desire as a soul. So, as a soul, we come here to learn things, to grow. And part of that is having attachments and desires. So, we actually want to come and we have this desire, this primal spark to create something, to build something, to love someone, to destroy something, to maintain or conserve something, right? There's a lot of different reasons that a soul might come to Earth. And essentially, that in this school of thought, in the reincarnation process as well, that a soul is connected to source, right? And source is everything. And we come to earth and find ourselves moving further and further away from source in each life into a more material, attached existence and a sensual, sensuous connection with earth and the
Mm.
material plane. And then at a certain point, we start moving back and we start finding that the soul is gravitating and advancing towards going back to source. And we can even see this if we look at, a person that's come here to be a successful businessman. And then we see someone who's come here to be a nun or live a more monastic life or live a life that is closer to the earth, is more simple in its form. And that's why Earth is so beautiful and amazing, because she is this place of existence with many different time space realities for us to live out very different types of lives in the reincarnation process to ultimately learn. We can also think of our own souls being part of a collective soul that is evolving as time goes on. So with Pluto, Pluto is absolutely connected to this sense of suffering at times, because it is connected by the way of death, both the metaphorical, the ego death, and also that literal physical death, but the rebirth. And both are painful. Death is painful, birth is painful. There is very much a sense of birth trauma and how that impacts us in our whole adult lives, and the way that babies come out of the womb and babies come in through the birth canal or through C-section, and how that can impact us even on a physiological level, the way that a baby comes out. So Pluto is harsh at times, cruel, it can be devastating, it can be annihilating, but it is serving this process of actually having our souls, both personal and collective, look at the ways that we are in loops of suffering, or we are in a space of being ready to shed a snake skin, right? The snake is also an animal that is connected to Pluto. And you can feel when you're too tight. And sometimes your soul has an opportunity and a choice. And we can even see this in the natal chart, times of growth and evolution. And there can be resistance, there can absolutely be avoidance. And then Pluto can come in and rip or abduct something from you. And that you are left grappling with that, and it's time to actually face that evolution. So I do think on a collective level, now that we have Pluto in Aquarius again, the sign of the revolutionary, the sign of the people, the sign of the future and progress and what comes next, technology, this is a really watershed moment of outgrowing a collective snake skin, and it's really uncomfortable and painful trying to shed that right now. And some of us are more adept and ready to help others to shed that, and some are very much resisting with their absolute might. And how can we find that bridge? And the work that you're doing, that I'm doing, this is what it's about. It's about coming back to how can we be bridges to help others in this evolutionary process that ultimately helps us to maintain this beautiful earth, this
Mhm,
playground, this sandbox, this physical existence where the time space realities we can all live can be,
mhm.
so we can continue to evolve with her. Otherwise, we're starting to lose this precious space, because we actually are hitting that moment where we've gone as feelings like we've gone as far as we can on that material scale. And it's time to start turning back a little bit towards that source and that reverence and that sacredness and that connection.
Yeah, that's so beautiful, and I so love that you brought in the topic of soul because Pluto, is this planet of evolution and transformation, but I'm also hearing that it's the planet of soul evolution. And so I'm thinking also about how in today with this huge collective movement we have towards what you were talking about, towards the future, away from the shadow and into the rebirth, understanding that there's like pain and constriction and initiation basically along every way station of that journey. I'm hearing more and more people sort of make these soul led changes in their lives. And you're hearing that come more and more into conversation too. Like, even for myself, I'm transitioning out of a more traditional job as a psychologist, and I'm leaning more into soul purpose work, which is land ceremony and which is earth connection. And you hear that a lot. Like, people are leaving corporate and going into astrology. And, I hear this because I talk to people individually all day as part of my job. But you also are talking about the collective soul movement of it really speaks to like this identity of who we are as humans and like the soul of the collective unconscious is making this like this growing up, growing out of journey into a new dimension, a new relationship with earth, a new relationship with ourselves. And I also, this is like, a little bit above my pay grade, but I also think about the earth herself feels to me sometimes like she's going through a soul retrieval, like an earth sized soul retrieval, that
Mm.
she's in her moment of like shaking off her snakeskin of being really related to in the way of this like totally inanimate material resource that the human family has basically just been extracting from and not in active relationship with as if she were a conscious being. And I feel that as part of her waking up and stretching and like pulling off of that snakeskin process, she's announcing herself as I am actually a conscious being. I have my own movements. I have my own soul. I have my own initiatory process. So this is making me think of, yeah, I'm just so glad that you brought soul into it. And I'm wondering if this like is connected to the Persephone's journey into the underworld.
Yes. So, in so many ways, I think that the story of the abduction of Persephone is a story of soul evolution and maturation. It is also a story that's heavily connected to the wrath of the earth, the wrath of Mother Gaia, who is intrinsically connected in many ways to Demeter, the goddess of grain, the goddess of agriculture, the goddess of everything that grows. So, in this story, we have Persephone, who's connected with her mother, who is in her maiden form, in her archetype of the maiden, the innocent, the sweet. And Hades decides that he wants her to be his bride. And there is a moment where he comes up in his chariot and breaks through the earth as she is looking at the flowers, and he abducts her into the underworld. He abducts her back to his place of his kingdom. And we have Demeter, who is looking everywhere for her daughter and trying to find her, walking 9 days and 9 nights, distraught, crying out for her daughter who has been stolen from her. And she lands at a well and is taken in by a kingdom and actually helps to nurse their son. And they don't know that she is a goddess. She kind of turns into this older woman form, this kind of meek and humble version of herself, and hides her divinity, hides her form. And Demeter, being so distraught, she had gone to try to rectify this and essentially has been told by Zeus, it is what it is, and this is happening this way. But she decides to take away all the crops. And it's interesting in variations of the story, the humans are suffering because there's nothing to harvest, right? And the land has gone dry. And really, actually, it's the gods and goddesses that start to be upset because there are no offerings that are available to be made to them because things have run dry. There's no wine to be given, there's no lambs to be slaughtered, grains to be given because things are barren, and this starts to become an issue and a problem. So Hermes, Mercury, gets involved and is sent down to the underworld to figure this out and to retrieve Persephone. And in this, she is ready to come up and is given pomegranate seeds by Hades. And since she eats a few of these pomegranate seeds, there is this contract that is made that she has to spend a third of her time in the underworld. And when she comes up and greets Demeter, Demeter is overjoyed to see her daughter. And we actually get through this story the seasons and why the seasons change in our earth, right? Because the time that Persephone is down in the underworld every year is the time of winter. It's the time when the land becomes barren and the land stops providing fruit. And then when she comes back in the spring is when things start to bloom again. Now, Demeter, having been taken in by this kingdom in Eleusis, she gives thanks and gives them a gift, and she teaches them what is known as the Eleusinian mysteries. For roughly 2,000 years, this was a mystery cult that would come and go through the rites of initiation and essentially be taken through a life and death process. And it was a secret. We still don't fully know what happened at Eleusis, but we have even people such as Marcus Aurelius and people from Rome and people from outside of Greece who came and were initiated into these rites until Christianity started to come in. So there's this mystery, this connection here where the Earth Mother has taught her children as a gift that connection of a ceremonial moment, an initiation to life and death itself. And in knowing death, you can fully know life. So the myth of Demeter and Persephone actually connects us to why we have the change of the seasons. Because when it's time for Persephone to go join her husband Hades in the underworld, it is the time where the land becomes barren because Demeter is in her time of mourning and sadness for not being with her daughter. And when Persephone is ready to come up and ascend back into the world, it is springtime and things are blooming again and coming to life in a rejoice of this connection of mother and daughter once more. Now, with this story, we have the Eleusinian mysteries that come out of this story because Demeter actually thanks the people that she was taken in with in Eleusis, and she teaches them the Eleusinian mysteries, which became a mystery cult. It was a rite of initiation. We actually don't fully know what was shared there. It was kept very secret, but it was a rite that connected one to the actual truth of life and death, which actually connects us to Pluto. It connects us to the knowledge of good and evil that we see even in the biblical story of Adam and Eve, right? Firsthand experience within our human body and our human experience, rather than it being through a priest or a priestess or someone else who becomes the intermediary between the experience of God or divinity or life and death. Now, with this, we also have Pluto and we have Gaia, Mother Earth. They actually were working together. And there's this incredible quote from the book, The Astrology of Fate by Liz Green, that I wanted to share that speaks of this story and this myth and how Pluto shows up with Mother Earth and how Mother Earth, in this way, we can see as both a nurturing figure for us who loves us, but also can sometimes conspire for our suffering. She can conspire for challenging aspects and challenging events to happen in our life as an act of love or as an act of evolutionary growth for us and initiation. Pluto, as an image of the dark maternal roots of the psyche, is forever pulling us out of life and back into the womb of the mother, either for renewal or death. The regressive tug of depression, apathy, loss of energy, which the African tribesmen can call loss of soul, despair, and death fantasies are the feeling components of this constant pressure to regress and return to the mother. Pluto is not only a rapist, breaking violently into outer life, but also a robber, stealing Persephone and dragging her below with him. The rapist robber is a common dream image accompanying the onset of depression and loss of interest in life. It's an equally common image in the dreams which cluster around the beginning of depth psychotherapy. The rapist robber heralds the abduction of the ego into the underworld. The myth makes clear, too, for whom Pluto, the male rapist, works. For when Hades steals his bride from her mother Demeter, he escapes into the great place below through a pathway opened up for him by Gaia, the Earth Mother. This strange involvement of the Great Mother in her own daughter's rape, for Gaia and Demeter are so similar they are unmistakably one goddess, suggests that the psyche requires this inward and downward movement for its own purposes, despite the suffering which is entailed to itself.
It's so good. It just totally encompasses everything. It's like tells the whole story. Thank you for sharing that. Such a powerful quote. Yeah, what comes out of it for me, I mean, I feel like there's so many side tangents that I want to go on, but what comes out of it the most is this beautiful paradox of the role that Earth, that Mother Earth, that Gaia has been playing in the story of the human family, and obviously in her own story as well, like her own journey of initiation, of descent, of ascent. But I'm thinking about how we mostly, I think, in human history have really thought of the earth as this eternal, giving, nurturing kind of source of life. I mean, she gave us literally life, and then she also sustained life on this planet. And in this endlessly giving, endlessly selfless way, that's how we, I think, have always related to her, that there will always be abundance, there will always be food to eat, there will always be water to drink, there will always be other beings to connect to, that every aspect of life is provided by her. And so I love also in this myth of Demeter and Persephone, this mention of the crops failing, and that actually the reason behind that was that the gods and goddesses were upset because they weren't being given offerings. This like so completely parallels the way that humans have been relating to the earth, in that I think where we're at right now, we see actually what is appearing to be a slowing down of life. We're seeing less viable land to grow food. We're seeing with climate change, we're seeing all of these atmospheric changes that actually make it less and less hospitable to life as we go on. Where, a lot of the climate data is basically saying that we're in the sixth mass extinction. We're seeing essentially the slowing down of life and the death of so many ecosystems and species on the planet. So it really mirrors, this concept of like we think that the crops are being taken away, the crops are being taken away, but what's actually happening is we are not honoring the gods and goddesses. We're not honoring the consciousness of the earth. We are not honoring her as a being. And so then I see her transition from this eternal mother archetype to this kind of mother who's like initiating us through all of this kind of violent and aggressive and really intense change. Like this is the climate change. This is the movement on the earth that we're seeing that's making it a lot harder to live, and that's very disruptive and chaotic. So I love this juxtaposition, this paradox of like the earth as this selfless giving mother, and also the earth as this very powerful force of initiation and force of change. Yeah, I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about that.
Absolutely. We see in this story this mother who has an eternal love for her child, and she's going to the ends of the earth to bring them back,
Mm,
right? She wants to have this child restored and back in a place of safety and back in a place of connection and being able to have a relationship with. But in the same way, the earth Gaia is cracking this open because this Persephone, this maiden, needs to be initiated into greater maturation within her own development. There are things that she learns from this trial, from this abduction away from the mother, the comfort, the breast, the mother's milk, the everlasting nurturing that she had been accustomed to, and going to the place of darkness and going to a place of being initiated by relationship even. And that is something that also is so important that we can speak about as well, of this place of needing to separate from the things that are comfortable in order to dive into aspects of union with each other, because relationships are hard, but they're some of our biggest learning. That's why we come here, and that's why we come to grow, is through the connection of one another and connecting with different souls. And part of those journeys, a lot of times, are betrayal. And through betrayal, we learn and we grow, and are given the opportunity for forgiveness, and we're given the opportunity to accrue wisdom. And it's safe to say that for many of us that have gone through hard relationships and going through devastating breakups or through loss, losing a partner through physical death, losing a partner through cheating or betrayal, those moments in our life are like mini underworld initiations. We go to the underworld just like Persephone. We're living the archetypal moment, but we also are being invited back by the earth ultimately to a place of homeostasis, to a place of joy. I
mm,
don't think that the earth wants us to stay in this place of the underworld. That's not what is happening here, and that's why it feels like sometimes in this world there's this constant barrage and consistency with the media, with the storytelling, where it is this consistent stay in fear, stay in disconnection, stay in divisiveness. And that's the part that is problematic that we've come to, that becomes an eye for an eye, and I'm just going to get what's mine, and we're going to be in competition. There are times that are meant for hardship and sadness and loss and feeling really hard, uncomfortable feelings and going through deep healing processes, whether in therapy, whether with different modalities. But ultimately, it's not a place we're meant to stay. It's not
Mhm.
a place that we're always supposed to be in a consistent, terrible moment and time. And that's where the earth is saying to us, hey, this is where you are. Look at the consequences of what has happened because you've lost your role as like stewards to the earth and
Yeah.
stewards to the other creatures and to your ancestors, which are the trees and the stones and the rivers and the elements. But also, I don't want you to stay in this place of suffering forever.
Yeah.
Please come back. Please come back to me. And we can have the celebration and we can have a moment of collective springtime. We are allowed to have these moments of collective celebration. And we do see that with cycles of the planets, especially the transpersonal planets of Uranus, Neptune, Pluto. We have collective moments of hope, but we are in a collective moment of initiation with Pluto.
Yeah, I'm so glad you said that because it's not just all about the initiation. It's also about the rebirth and what happens after we've been reborn and the ways that we can actually start anew. And it's kind of the question being asked is can we be new? Can we actually be different on the other side? I really love this framing of learning through relationship because when we're talking about this idea of eternal mother to mother initiator, we're also looking at the difference that humans and the earth have had in our relationship structure. And I'm in Terras Gamos, it's this idea that we are graduating from her children to her partners. And I think even
Mm.
before, from a long way back, you mentioned the word stewardship, and we're in this process of remembrance, which is part of the rebirth. We know what it means to be stewards of the earth. We know what it means to caretake. It's written into our DNA, but we've lost touch with that. And so it's this idea of coming into active love relationship with the earth and essentially partnering with her, becoming earth partners instead of first earth stewards and then earth children. I think that in this place of rebirth, how we can be new and different on the other side of the initiation is that we can enter into this relationship with her. We are her partners. And we talked about this idea of like integrating where we've come from. It's not just transcending, and it's also not just returning to our indigenous ancestors. We're not those people, we've been shaped by the modern world. So I love that you talked about this idea of like we learn through relationship, because I think that's actually the journey that we're all on. When we come into the rebirth, we're coming into the relationship in an integrated way, with the recognition of all of the pain and all of the shadow that we've gone through in order to learn, grow, mature, evolve, and then come into, I think what you're kind of saying is like the earth's natural expression, or this thing that she really wants us to remember, which is love, is this collective springtime. It's this harmony, that's the new earth place that everyone's talking about. And we're just talking about it slightly differently. It's like we need to have the fullness of the descent into the ascent, and then the whole process of that.
Yes. The integration of all is really important, and especially when we speak on New Earth and how there are certain aspects of the New Age sector
Yeah.
that even sometimes harkens a little bit to the kind of apocalyptic rapture
Yeah.
aspects of Christianity, that this new earth is going to be certain people who ascend to this place and others who don't. And we really want to take a look at the language and the context and how we are framing what it means for those of us who are dreaming and yearning and desiring to create something new and to have a paradigm shift. And I also, like you said, we are not fully returning to the old ways. That's really important. We are absolutely integrating them. There is a movement for re-indigenizing ourselves.
Mhm.
And there is even semantics between decolonizing ourselves or uncolonizing ourselves, and important work that has to be done in those spaces, but also not romanticizing aspects of the past as well, and looking at the ways that we can honor the science, the progress, the technology, the advancements that have really shaped us and have given us the tools and abilities to move into this new place of existence, and harmonizing with what our ancestors did that helped them to steward the land and to keep the balance of the ecosystems for as long as they did, for as many generations as they
Mhm.
did. So it's important that we don't romanticize the past. We don't over idealize the future, right? It's a really tricky balance that we have to keep of staying in the reality of certain aspects and groundedness, but also dreaming and knowing that everything that has come forward for humanity has started in our imaginations in some way, has
Yeah.
been given to us in dreams in some way, has been given to us by our ancestors, the plants, the trees, the animals here as indigenous cultures who kept that connection, that sixth sense, the extrasensory part of ourselves so intact that we lost in many ways through modernism and through the inventions that we've had. And so it's a merging, it's an integrating, it's a coming into the soil, it feels like, into the roots, and not reaching for this place way out in the sky
Yeah.
and not reaching all the way back and reverting fully, but finding that common ground that helps us to merge logic with intuition, helps us to find, like we were talking about at the beginning, kind of the both and the integration of the duality of the moment.
Yeah, yeah, beautifully said. So I actually have on that note, I have one last question for you. When we're moving into this place of integration, of merging, this active love relationship with the earth, what is, and I love how you said it comes in through imagination, through dreaming, and it's a place that partially we've been and also in other ways a place we've never arrived to yet. And so we're kind of building the plane as we're flying it in a sense. We have foundational things that we're really relying on, but we also have this innate sense of who we could be. It's like stepping back into our true divinity as humans. It's like merging with the higher vibration of the earth's energy of love and connection and unity and harmony, all these things we talk about. And we're going to try to figure that out as a collective in this kind of huge planetary transition we're in. You hear a lot about Pluto and Aquarius these days and how it's about more creativity, individuality, personal power, power to the people. And so I'm just wondering from your perspective, I mean, we've talked about this from a mythic lens, from an astrologic lens. What do you see planetarily and maybe even, we talked a lot about Pluto today. Maybe there's more that you want to add to it besides Pluto. I also know there's a Pluto out of bounds piece that we forgot to talk about. But I'm wondering what is supportive to humans arriving into this new place of relationality with Earth and this merging and integrating this place that I think is going to be our work for the next couple of decades. Is that right? Is that fair to say?
Yes, it is our work in our lifetime. We've signed up to be here at this time, at this intersection that is intense, where we have the climate hanging on a balance, microplastics, we have tech and robots and AI and things that some of us, it's hard to even imagine where the technology already is. Leaders who are talking about immortality and trying to extend their lives. There's so many different facets of where we find ourselves at this moment. And one of the ways that we can really dive into our role is by understanding our what is called our original instructions, right? And this is by way of the astrological chart. This is by way of understanding your Nawal that you are born under in the Mayan count. This can be through practices such as in the Lakota tradition, going and participating in Hambleche, a vision quest, going up on the mountain, quieting the mind, fasting, purifying yourself to sit and receive, to understand and come back to the original instructions of the soul, because so much conditioning usually is placed upon us in the early formative years. We have the parental conditioning or the guardianship conditioning. We have what is taught to us at school, our friends, our community, our society. We're living in certain specific matrices that inform our conditioning. So it's really important to question in a healthy way everything that you have been taught and understood, and then to also find those resources that can help us to understand that. And I do feel confidently that astrology is one of those resources that helps us to understand who we are, what we came to do in this particular life, how we came to show up, and we see this in the natal chart. We also have, if we're talking about Pluto, the Pluto generations.
Mm.
So we have at this moment quite the dynamic because Pluto is now in Aquarius, making this opposition to Pluto and Leo. This is the baby boomers. This is the generation of Trump. This is the generation of Netanyahu. This is the generation of these leaders who are in place right now that have come up in a post World War II era. And we have that opposition starting to impact their mortality. This is the moment where they're starting to find themselves having to really face death very uncomfortably and sometimes making decisions that are putting the collective at harm because of an intrinsic fear of that mortality that is being faced. As well, there is a very important coming up and coming into power that is going to be happening over the next 20 years for the Pluto and Scorpio generation. So that's going to be people born roughly between 1983 to 1995. This is an important generation that is going to inherit certain transfers of wealth, wisdom, material, government positions, leadership, and the like from the baby boomer Pluto in Leo generation. But we also look at Pluto in Scorpio. This is the generation that has come here to be the cleanup crew. This is, I find, with a lot of Pluto and Scorpio people, we're the people who are wanting to look at generational wounds, generational trauma, what happened in our family, what happened to our mom and dad, what happened to our grandparents, how has war affected this family line, how has child sexual abuse affected this family line, how has famine affected this family line, how has torture affected this family line. And I see a lot of people who are interested in being cycle breakers and wanting to investigate and pop up the hood and look at the secrets of the family, of the society. And it is the generation that has gone through the 2008 economic crisis, watched 9/11 when it happened in 2001, has gone through the pandemic. It has been a generation that has seen a lot of ups and downs and things where we were told that life would be a certain way, and then life has fundamentally shifted from what might have been told to us as children. And so while that's really scary, and there's an opportunity for certain people in the Pluto and Scorpio generation to actually inhibit a lot of harm, right? Because Scorpio, just like T hash, just like the blade, it's kind of the energy of the healer and the harmer in the same vein.
Mm,
We have that set of opportunity, but we also are the people who are the vultures eating the dead carrion. We're cleaning up this environment and transmuting the waste. We're transmuting what is ultimately hurting our earth and
yeah.
hurting our relationships and trying to dive in and be the transformers at this time. So getting to know your own Pluto in your chart is going to be really helpful in these times, and also getting to know where even your sun sign, your ascendant, what are you an ambassador of in this life? Are you here to build? Are you here to nurture? Are you here to fight? Are you here to protect and conserve? We all have a role and it's all important.
Mm. So I'm hearing you say that this Pluto and Scorpio generation, and I am of that generation, and you are as well, I'm sure, I think, that we're the
I am.
composter. Yeah. We're the composter generation. That's sort of what I'm hearing with all of this. There's like the real call to action in terms of looking back and reckoning with all that came before, everything that had been suppressed, everything that had been unspoken. And then I think a lot of us are really waking up to this lineage pain that we are actually feeling. I don't think that we're just doing all of this looking for fun. I think it's because we are recognizing how impacted we have been by all of this ancestral wounding that has never been accounted for, that's never been reckoned with. So I'm hearing that that's a very special astrological soul collective assignment that those of us in this generation are going through. And it's reminding me of the life cycles of the earth and the seasonal changes of the earth, that in order to move into harmony and relationship learning and like this kind of collective upgrade of what it means to be in a healthy relationship, being in right relationship with the earth, being in reciprocity, understanding offerings as, the counterbalance to extraction. That's what I think of of when I think of like this new relationship place that we're coming to in our evolution. I'm hearing that to get there, we have to first do all of this composting of pain. And so I'm thinking about how she does it. She drops the leaves and then the leaves have to become soil and then the soil can grow new seeds and then those seeds can flower. So I'm looking forward to the time that this generation gets to be in our flowering. But I'm hearing that we're on this very sacred mission to do this composting of pain in this Plutonian way in order to be able to eventually flower and come into whatever this new earth energy wants to be.
Most definitely. And this is an important time for us over the next 20 years because our Pluto is in a square, which is a dynamic of action and tension and friction with the Pluto and Leo generation. And also, it's in a square with Pluto and Aquarius. So we have a role of bringing this friction and moving the tectonic plate, moving that shift as the Pluto and Leo generation start to go into their final return, leave what has been left to us, and we can start transitioning aspects of regeneration in the ways that we need to.
Mhm.
We have our other allies with Pluto and Virgo and the service orientation that is shared there and health. Pluto and Libra, 1971 and 1984. These are people who we're diving into, in a lot of ways, new relational dynamics. And then we have our youth, Pluto and Sag, Pluto and Capricorn. Pluto and Sagittarius, they're out here, they want truth. They're trying to figure out beliefs and understandings and trying to see things in a new and expansive way. So everybody is going to be working together in the ways that they can so that we can all come into our flowering. And we do. We have collective flowering seasons and then we also have our personal flowering seasons, and that's what I really love about astrology is we don't necessarily have to compare and contrast at times. We can trust and celebrate when each cycle and season is ready to be here instead of being like, I'm so upset. Let's just get to the next cycle. I'm impatient and yeah, it's a good lesson and being content, maybe not being all happy all the time, but being content in what cycle and season you're in and doing the work to move towards the next one.
Yeah, and it's actually making me feel less alone or something, hearing about every generation has its own personal mission that we're all playing this role. I'm like, oh, good. I'm not, us in the Pluto and Scorpio generation, we're the composters, but then there's also the truth seekers, and everyone has a different role to play. And so I love that about astrology. I'm really grateful that you're sharing all of this with us today because I feel like I'm learning so much about just these generational cycles, these time cycles, and how we're all here essentially in these kind of groups or demographics or time cycles. We're all here to play our own part in helping the human family mature, evolve, and grow into Earth partnership. So I feel like I have learned a lot today about how astrology is actually kind of explaining all of that. It's guiding all of that. There's a lot of teaching. And I know astrology often is talking about how it's like it's written and we're just living it out in the material way on Earth. So thank you for joining me and connecting some of these dots. It's been such a pleasure and just an eye-opening conversation. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure. I love talking Pluto and Earth partnership and ceremony with you. I think we could probably talk for 2 more hours and still have so much to connect on, but we will leave it at that beautiful point. And until next time, it's been an absolute pleasure.
Yeah, sounds great. Perfect. We'll have you back for part 2 really soon. Well, thank you so much, Samantha. Magnetic electricity revolution.